Human soldier steps in front of a blade for the alien princess. Her life debt tradition demands more. The galactic summit was a pivotal event. Representatives from countless species gathered to discuss the future of the galaxy. The fate of hundreds of planets hung in the balance. The alien princess, Aislia, stood at the center of it all, her presence commanding attention even from the most powerful leaders in the room. A member of the royal Zorvian family, she was expected to bring peace to a galaxy on the brink of war. But her role was far from simple. It came with burdens, ones she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. The Zorvian Empire had a long history, and in recent years it had become more complicated. Aislia's father, Emperor Zornak, had grown increasingly isolated, leaving her to step into his shoes before she felt prepared. The weight of her crown, both literal and figurative, made her shoulders ache. She was not yet fully trained in diplomacy, though she had spent years studying it. The fact that she was still so young, barely 25, made others in the room question her ability to lead. But she had been raised in the shadow of an empire that valued honor above all else, and that tradition demanded her best. As she took her place among the other leaders, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air in the grand hall felt too tense, too thick with unspoken words. Despite all the security and carefully arranged meetings, she had the nagging sensation that something was about to go terribly wrong. She turned her gaze to the representatives from Earth, the humans. They were not the most advanced species in the galaxy, but their military strength and diplomatic influence had made them formidable allies. And it was one human in particular who caught her eye, Lieutenant Michael Ward. He was stationed with a small unit of human soldiers, part of the Earth delegation. Aislia didn't know much about him, except that he had a reputation for being a loyal, courageous soldier, a trait that made him stand out even among his own kind. He was tall, his dark hair neatly trimmed, and his eyes constantly scanning the room, alert to every movement. He stood at ease, his posture straight, but his eyes were watchful, taking in the surroundings with the wariness of someone who had seen more than his fair share of danger. As the meeting progressed, the tension in the room grew. Voices were raised, and the council members of various species began to argue. The discussions over resources, boundaries, and the future of the galaxy had become heated. Aislia sat at the center of the table, trying her best to keep her composure. She had learned to listen more than speak, allowing the seasoned diplomats to make their cases while she absorbed every word. But today, there was little time for patience. The negotiations had reached a boiling point. Suddenly, the doors to the hall slammed open with an unnerving force. A figure dressed in black armor, his face obscured by a helmet, stormed into the room. Without warning, he pulled a blade from his belt and lunged toward Aislia, his intentions clear. The room erupted in chaos as guards rushed forward to intercept him. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. Aislia's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't even seen the man approach. Everything happened so quickly, too quickly for anyone to react. Her body froze. The guards surrounding her struggled to close the gap between them and the assassin, but they were too far away, too slow. In that moment, something inside her snapped. The instinct to survive, to protect herself, kicked in, but it wasn't enough. The assassin was nearly upon her, and the blade gleamed in the dim light of the hall. Just as she braced for the worst, a blur of motion came from her side. Lieutenant Ward, who had been standing near the edge of the gathering, moved faster than anyone could have expected. In one smooth motion, he hurled himself between Aislia and the assassin, his body colliding with the attacker in a desperate attempt to stop the blow. The blade, meant for the princess, found its mark in Michael's side instead. A sharp gasp of pain escaped his lips as he crumpled to the floor, clutching his wound. The room went silent. It felt as though time had stopped entirely. Aislia's heart raced in her chest. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The human soldier, Michael Ward, had taken the blade for her. He had saved her life. She stared down at him, her breath catching in her throat. Blood stained his uniform as he struggled to stay conscious, his face pale. Yet his eyes remained locked onto hers, filled with a strange mixture of determination and acceptance. The guards quickly subdued the assassin, dragging him away, but no one moved to tend to Michael right away. It was as though they were all too stunned to act. The princess, however, had no time to waste. She rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Stay with me," she said, her voice trembling. "You've been hurt." Michael coughed, a trickle of blood escaping his lips. It's nothing, just a scratch. The princess shook her head, her mind racing. She had seen the way the blade had sunk deep into his side. This was no minor injury. He needed medical attention immediately. But she also knew that the severity of what had just transpired would not be easily dismissed. The room buzzed with murmurs of disbelief. The humans who had once been wary of her presence now regarded her with mixed feelings, fear, respect, and perhaps even some admiration. But it wasn't just the humans who were looking at her. Every leader in the room was watching with an intensity that made her skin crawl, and that was when she realized something. This act of sacrifice, this human soldier's willingness to die for her, had far-reaching consequences. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was part of something larger than herself, something that would bind her future to Michael's in ways that neither of them could yet comprehend. As the guards finally moved to tend to Michael's wound, Aislia couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much greater story. The human soldier had taken the blade for her, but the consequences of that act would ripple through the galaxy in ways none of them could predict. Aislia's life was no longer hers alone to control. She was now bound by an ancient tradition, one that demanded more than gratitude and a simple thank you. The life debt had been invoked, and the rules of the Zorvian Empire were clear. Michael's sacrifice had marked him as her protector, her sworn servant. There would be no turning back now. The pain in Michael's side throbbed with each heartbeat, and he gritted his teeth against it. His vision swam as his body screamed for him to lie down, but he refused to let himself fall into unconsciousness. He couldn't afford to, not yet. Not after what he had just done. Around him, the palace hall was chaos. Guards had rushed to subdue the would-be assassin, dragging him away in chains. Others were attending to him, trying to stabilize his wound, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the princess, the one he had sworn to protect, even though he hadn't asked for it. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as he tried to steady himself. His eyes found her in the crowd, kneeling beside him, her face filled with an emotion he couldn't quite read. She had been so close to death, too close. Aislia's eyes, wide with concern, never left him. The soldiers around her moved quickly to secure the area, but the princess was focused solely on Michael. Her gaze softened as she brushed a strand of her silvery hair from her face, still kneeling in front of him. He had saved her life, but he wasn't supposed to. She hadn't asked for it, and now it was as though fate had thrust them into something neither of them understood. Why? Aislia's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried across the tension-filled air. She hadn't meant to ask out loud. It wasn't for her to question why a soldier would risk everything for someone like her. But there was something about the way Michael had moved, so quickly, without hesitation, that left her perplexed. And it wasn't just gratitude that swirled inside her chest. It was something deeper, something she couldn't explain. Michael's lips twitched upward in a half-smile, despite the blood pouring from his wound. He didn't respond immediately. His body felt heavy, his thoughts foggy, but he didn't want to worry her. He had done what any soldier would have done. At least that's what he told himself. "Because I had to," he said hoarsely, his voice strained. The words sounded weak, but they were the truth. His sense of duty had overridden his own survival instinct. He wasn't sure why he had acted so impulsively, why he had moved in front of her in the first place. It was just instinct. The second he saw the blade, he knew what he had to do, and in a way it hadn't even been a choice. Aislia's brow furrowed. His words were simple, but they didn't quite make sense to her. To her, he was human, a foreign soldier, a protector sent to watch over her during the summit. He had no reason to put himself in harm's way for her, but he had. And in that act, he had invoked a tradition that was as old as her people themselves. A life debt, a bond that would tie them together in ways neither of them could yet fathom. The Zorvian Empire's code of honor was unyielding, and once a life debt was sworn, it could not be undone. Michael had saved her life, and now, whether he liked it or not, he was bound to her. He was sworn to protect her, serve her, and defend her in every way. For the rest of his life. At first, Aislia hadn't fully understood the significance of what had just happened. She had heard of the life debt tradition before, of course. It was a well-known custom among the Zorvians. But it wasn't until the blood of a human soldier stained the floor in front of her that the true weight of the tradition sank in. This wasn't just a formality. This was something real, something she couldn't escape. As the guards finally finished tending to Michael's injury, they helped him to his feet. Despite the pain, he refused to be laid down on a stretcher, insisting he could stand on his own. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to focus on the here and now. He had to stay upright. He had to keep his wits about him. The princess was still at the center of the storm, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Aislia stood as well, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for him. She wanted to say something, to offer words of gratitude, but no words felt adequate. How could they be? She was bound to him now, whether she liked it or not. He had saved her, and the very idea of it left her with a deep sense of confusion. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I didn't ask for you to save me." Michael's eyes softened as he met her gaze. He could see the confusion in her eyes, the weight of her words. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to owing anything to anyone, not even to someone like him. "I didn't ask for it either," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a hint of frustration. He wasn't angry at her, not really. It was the situation itself that frustrated him. How had he ended up here? A soldier who had simply been following orders had now been thrust into a position where his life was no longer his own, where his future was no longer his own. "But the life debt is a tradition here. There's nothing we can do about it." The princess turned her face away, as though the very mention of the life debt was something she couldn't bear to hear. And Michael understood. He had never been one for tradition, not in the way the Zorvians revered it. It was clear that Aislia didn't want to be bound by it. She didn't want to owe anything to anyone, especially not to a human soldier like him. But there was something deeper at play here, something neither of them could yet grasp. The life debt was more than just an obligation. It was a promise. And once it was sworn, it bound two souls together in ways that transcended species, class, or rank. It was a bond forged in blood, in sacrifice, and in duty. As the days passed, the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt faded, but the tension between Michael and Aislia only grew. She had insisted that he be treated in the palace's medical wing, but Michael was having none of it. He refused to rest, refused to be coddled. It was only a scratch, after all, nothing to concern himself with. He would heal quickly. He always did. But his refusal to stay in bed didn't make things easier. Aislia's royal duties continued despite the near assassination, and she had no choice but to carry on with the summit. The other leaders, although they were grateful for Michael's heroism, had their own agendas to push. The peace talks were more fragile than ever, and every moment felt like it could shatter into open conflict. Still, despite the turmoil surrounding them, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something bigger than just the political unrest. The life debt was like a shadow hanging between him and the princess, a constant reminder of the bond they now shared. Aislia, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She had never experienced anything like this before, being so dependent on someone else, on a soldier who had no ties to her people, no reason to care about her life beyond a simple duty. It made her feel vulnerable, something she had rarely allowed herself to feel. And yet, despite the unease, there was a part of her that found comfort in Michael's presence. He was strong, he was capable, and in his own way, he was beginning to feel like a protector, a shield she never thought she'd need. But now, in the face of all that was to come, she couldn't deny that she did. But with the life debt came responsibility. A responsibility neither of them fully understood yet. Michael woke to the soft hum of the palace's medical bay. The steady beep of machines monitoring his vitals filled the room, but his mind was far from calm. The pain in his side had faded to a dull throb, but the deeper ache came from something far less physical. It was the weight of the promise, the life debt, that loomed over him now. The life he had been forced to pledge to a princess from another world. He hadn't asked for this. Not for the blade, not for the wound, and certainly not for the overwhelming responsibility that came with saving a royal. But that's what he'd done, hadn't he? In an instant, he had stepped in front of the princess without thinking, and now there was no turning back. Not for him, not for her, not for either of them. He sat up slowly, the cool sheets sliding off his body as he swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His uniform was gone, replaced by the medical gown they had dressed him in, and a bandage wrapped tightly around his side. It didn't matter to him. He didn't care about his physical state anymore. He cared about the future, his future and the future that had been so abruptly altered. The doors to his room slid open, and a figure entered, tall and regal. Aislia, the princess, dressed in an elegant gown that shimmered like the stars themselves, walked toward him. Her presence was commanding, yet her expression softened as she saw him awake. "Lieutenant Ward," she greeted him, her voice calm but laced with something else, concern, perhaps, or even curiosity. "You're awake." Michael looked up at her, still not used to the sight of someone so royal standing before him. He had seen the leaders of many species, but none quite like her. She was different, different in a way that unsettled him. "I'm fine," he muttered, trying to wave off her concern. "You didn't have to come here. I'll be out of here in a few hours." But Aislia didn't seem convinced. Her piercing eyes studied him, her expression unreadable. She walked toward the chair beside his bed and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "You don't understand, do you?" she said softly. "This isn't just about a wound or a simple life saved. It's about what comes next." Michael shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the growing tension in the room. What came next? He didn't want to think about it. All he wanted was to get back to his unit, finish his assignment, and return to the life he knew. The life where he didn't owe anyone anything. "Look, I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I didn't ask to save you. I didn't ask to be bound by some ancient tradition, but that's what happened, and I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it." Aislia didn't flinch. She held his gaze steady, her eyes reflecting a mix of frustration and something softer. Understanding, perhaps. "You are now bound by the life debt," she said, her voice firm. "Whether you accept it or not, you have sworn yourself to me to my protection, and that is something you cannot simply walk away from." Michael's jaw clenched as he looked away from her, his mind racing. The thought of being bound by a tradition so alien to him, so completely outside of everything he understood, made him feel suffocated. He had never been one for tradition, especially not traditions that demanded so much from him. He was a soldier, not a servant. But that was precisely what he had become the moment he stepped in front of her. "I don't need a protector," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction he wanted. "I can take care of myself. I've been doing it my entire life." Aislia's lips tightened as though she were fighting to maintain her composure. "That's not what this is about. The life debt is a bond, a promise. You may not want it, but it exists between us now. You can't erase it, Lieutenant Ward, and neither can I." Michael exhaled sharply, feeling a surge of frustration bubble up inside him. "Then what am I supposed to do?" he asked, his tone laced with exasperation. "You're the princess. You have your guards, your soldiers. You don't need a human like me to follow you around, guarding your every step." Aislia met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She knew she had the upper hand. She knew that, in a way, she could make him do whatever she wanted. That was the nature of the life debt. But it wasn't what she wanted, not really. "I don't want to force you into something you don't want," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "But the tradition of my people demands it, and I cannot ignore it, not when you have saved my life." Michael's thoughts swirled in confusion. He didn't understand the weight of her words. The life debt was something that couldn't be taken lightly, but to him it was just an obligation. He wasn't some hero, some protector. He was a soldier who had done his duty. But the way Aislia spoke about it made him wonder if he was missing something, something deeper. He rubbed a hand over his face, the frustration building. "What do you expect from me?" he asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with a mix of weariness and anger. Aislia paused for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her words were softer, almost reluctant. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't ask for this either. I didn't ask for you to save me, and I certainly didn't ask for you to be bound to me by this tradition. But you are. And now we must figure out what that means." The silence between them was heavy, filled with the tension of unspoken truths. Michael could feel it, the pull of the bond between them, the unshakable connection that had been forged the moment he had taken the blade for her. It was a bond neither of them had chosen, yet here they were, tangled in its web. "I didn't want this," Michael said again, his voice low. "But I'm here now, and I'll do what I have to do, but I'm not going to be your personal bodyguard. I'm a soldier, and that's what I do best." Aislia looked at him, her expression softening. "I never asked you to be just a bodyguard," she said quietly. I just need to understand, to know what comes next." Michael let out a long breath, staring at her. He didn't have the answers, he didn't have a plan. But he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away, not after what had happened. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was bound to this alien princess. A bond that went far beyond simple protection. And he didn't know how he felt about it, or what he was supposed to do with it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The weight of their situation hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Aislia was lost in thought, her mind racing through the implications of the life debt. Michael was lost in his own thoughts, his mind swirling with questions he didn't know how to answer. Finally, Aislia stood up, the motion graceful and fluid. "I need to prepare for the next stage of the summit," she said, her voice steady once more. "There is much to be done." Michael nodded, though his mind was far from the summit and its politics. His mind was on the princess, on the life debt, on the bond that had been forged between them and what it meant for both of them. He had stepped in front of her blade. And now there was no going back. The days following Michael's injury blurred together in a haze of meetings, long talks, and rising tension. The summit was far from over, and though the immediate danger to Aislia had passed, the underlying threat was still there. The galaxy was on the edge of war, and no one knew if peace was even possible. But what weighed heavily on Michael was not the political turmoil. It was the life debt that now bound him to Princess Aislia. Every time he looked at her, he felt the weight of the promise he had unwittingly made. The Zorvian tradition of life debt was more than just a simple agreement. It was a lifelong bond, and it meant he would be tied to her in ways he couldn't predict. He wasn't sure what that meant for him or for her, but every moment they spent in each other's company only deepened the sense of inevitability that hung between them. He spent his time attending to the princess's needs, helping with security, organizing the human delegation, and offering his expertise in combat strategy when necessary. It wasn't what he had imagined he would be doing when he signed up for this mission. But the bond had been sealed, and now his duty was to protect her at all costs. Aislia, too, felt the tension. Her people were on edge, and the summit had become a battleground in itself. The peace talks were supposed to bring an end to the looming conflict, but every day, new challenges emerged. Political factions, rebel groups, and intergalactic corporations all seemed to have their own agendas. The princess had become the symbol of hope for peace, but she was also the target of those who wanted war. One evening, as Michael stood guard outside Aislia's quarters, his mind wandered to the day's events. The political leaders had argued fiercely during the summit, and even the most seasoned diplomats had begun to lose hope of reaching an agreement. The galaxy was divided, and the cracks were beginning to show. It seemed like no matter what they tried, there would always be someone who sought to push the galaxy toward destruction. Aislia had asked him to accompany her for a walk around the palace gardens that evening. It wasn't an order, but a request. A rare one, as the princess usually kept to herself during moments of respite. Michael, though reluctant to leave his post, couldn't refuse her. As much as he tried to push it aside, the life debt was never far from his mind. The garden was quiet, the night air cool and filled with the scent of alien flowers that bloomed only in the dark. Aislia walked beside him, her footsteps soft on the grass. The moonlight bathed the garden in an ethereal glow, casting long shadows across the stone paths. Michael kept his eyes forward, his mind focused on the horizon. He didn't want to dwell on the weight of his bond to the princess, nor did he want to acknowledge the strange tension that seemed to grow with each passing day. "You're very quiet tonight," Aislia remarked after a few moments, her voice breaking the silence. Michael glanced at her, surprised. He hadn't realized how distant he had become. "Just thinking," he muttered, though his thoughts were far from clear. He didn't know what to say, not anymore. He wasn't sure if they could have a normal conversation, not with everything that had happened between them, not with the life debt hanging over them both. Aislia turned to face him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read the thoughts he wasn't sharing. "You don't have to be quiet around me, Michael," she said, her tone almost gentle. "I know this isn't easy for either of us." His chest tightened at her words. It wasn't easy, not by any stretch of the imagination. He had never signed up for any of this. He had never asked to be the princess's protector, to be bound to her by an ancient tradition that made no sense to him. He had never asked to put his life on the line for someone who wasn't even his own kind. But here he was, and he couldn't escape the bond now, no matter how hard he tried. "I don't know how to do this," Michael admitted, his voice low. "This life debt. It's not like anything I've ever known. I'm just a soldier. I'm not some royal guard. I don't belong in this world." Aislia studied him for a long moment, her gaze softening. "You're not just a soldier, Michael," she said quietly. "You're the one who saved my life. You did more than any of my guards could ever do." Her words were unexpected, and Michael felt a knot form in his throat. He wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone of her status. He had always believed that soldiers were supposed to remain in the background, doing their job without fanfare. But Aislia's words made him feel like he had done something that mattered, like he had done something right, even if he hadn't intended it. "I didn't want to," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't ask to save you, I didn't want this bond between us." Aislia's eyes dropped to the ground, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. Michael couldn't help but notice the way the light played across her face, making her appear distant, like someone trapped between two worlds. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person, too, and Michael could see the weight of that burden in her eyes. "I didn't ask for this either," she said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't ask for you to save me. I didn't ask for the life debt to exist, but now it does, and we must figure out what that means." Michael didn't know how to respond to that. He couldn't argue with her. There was no way out of this. They were both trapped in a situation that neither of them had chosen. But there was something about the way she said it, as if she too was struggling with the same uncertainty he felt. He could see the weight of it on her shoulders, the burden of leadership that she had never asked for. "I don't want to be your prisoner," Michael said suddenly, his words more blunt than he intended. "I don't want to be bound by this debt. I don't want to be forced into some life I don't understand." Aislia stopped walking, turning to face him with an expression that was both sad and resolute. "You're not my prisoner, Michael, and you're not forced into anything, but the life debt, it's part of my culture. It's part of who I am, and I can't change that." He opened his mouth to argue, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I understand why you're frustrated. I understand why you feel trapped. But I'm trapped too, in my own way. I can't lead my people alone. I can't change the traditions that bind me, and I can't pretend that what happened between us doesn't matter." Michael frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What happened?" he asked, though he had a feeling he already knew the answer. Aislia's gaze softened. "I'm not asking you to be more than what you are, but I do need you, Michael. I need you more than you know." His heart skipped a beat. He didn't want to need anyone. He didn't want to feel this connection to her, but the words lingered, filling the space between them. The bond had already been formed, and there was no denying it. As they continued walking through the garden, the silence between them felt different now. It wasn't the silence of distance or frustration. It was a quiet understanding. An acknowledgement that neither of them could control what was happening, but they would have to find a way to live with it. The peace talks continued, but the quiet conversations in the garden were just as important. For Michael and Aislia, they were beginning to understand each other, even in their differences. The road ahead was uncertain, and neither of them knew where it would lead, but for the first time, they both recognized that they would face it together. The following days were a blur of endless discussions, negotiations, and security measures. The galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos, and Aislia was caught at the center of it all. Every decision she made seemed to push the galaxy one step closer to war or peace, and every move was watched by allies and enemies alike. The burden was heavier than she had ever imagined, and each new day felt like it might be her last. But despite the tension, despite the uncertainty, Michael never left her side. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was her protector, her lifeline, and the bond between them had only grown stronger in the days since the assassination attempt. And with that bond came the constant reminder of the life debt that tethered them together. It was a strange, unspoken connection, one that neither of them could escape, no matter how much they might want to. Aislia had tried to push Michael away at first. She had wanted to keep a distance, to remind herself that he was only here because of the debt he owed her. But every time she looked at him, she saw more than just a soldier. She saw a man who had sacrificed everything for her, and in doing so had given her a part of his life, a part of his soul. And Michael, he had tried to distance himself from the princess too. He had wanted to remain distant, to keep his emotions at bay, but it was impossible. There was no way to ignore the connection between them. It wasn't just the life debt that bound them. It was the shared experiences, the battles fought together, the moments when neither of them could see a way out, yet still they pressed on. Michael had never believed in fate, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that it had brought him here for a reason. It was late one evening, after a particularly grueling day of talks, when Michael found himself alone in one of the palace's many gardens, standing beneath a canopy of stars. The night air was crisp, and the soft rustle of alien trees filled the silence around him. He had always found comfort in the stillness, in the quiet that came after the chaos of the day, But tonight, the quiet felt different. It felt heavier, as if the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on him. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. Everything had changed since that moment in the summit hall. He had never planned to be here, to be this close to Aelia, to become bound to her by a tradition he didn't understand. But he had made his choice, even if it had been made for him. He couldn't undo the past, no matter how much he wished he could. "Michael!" The voice came softly from behind him, and he turned to see Aelia walking toward him, her silhouette bathed in the pale light of the moons above. She looked as regal as ever, her silver hair glowing faintly in the night, but there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of vulnerability. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice a little sharper than he meant. He wasn't angry, but the weight of their situation had begun to take a toll on him. They had spent so many days together, and yet there were still so many things unsaid between them. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied softly, stopping just a few feet away from him. "This place is too loud sometimes, don't you think?" Michael nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't know what to say to her anymore. Everything felt tangled, like a knot that was only growing tighter the more he tried to pull it apart. The bond, the debt, the strange connection between them, it was all becoming overwhelming. Aelia seemed to sense his inner turmoil. She took a step closer, her presence gentle but undeniable. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," she said, her voice quiet. "And I know that what I'm asking of you is more than anyone should ever have to bear. But you saved my life, Michael, and now I'm asking you to stay, not because you have to, but because I need you." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had known she needed him, but hearing her say it aloud, he hadn't been prepared for that. He had thought of himself as a protector, a soldier doing his duty, but never as someone who was needed on this level. Not like this. "Aelia," he started, his voice hoarse. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know how to be what you need." Aelia stepped closer, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I don't need you to be anyone else," she said softly. "I need you to be you. You don't have to be a prince or a general. You don't have to be anyone other than the person who stepped in front of me that day, the one who saved my life." Michael's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment all he could do was stare at her. There was a rawness in her words, an honesty that cut through the layers of confusion and fear that had built up between them. She wasn't asking him to be perfect. She wasn't asking him to fulfill some ideal. She was asking him to be present, to be there in a way that he hadn't been able to allow himself to be. "I never wanted this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted to be tied to you like this, but now that I am, I don't know how to walk away. I don't know how to unmake the choice I made." Aelia reached out, her hand brushing against his arm, the touch light but comforting. "You don't have to walk away," she said softly. "You don't have to unmake anything. The choice is already made. And we will figure this out together." The simplicity of her words struck him harder than anything else she had said. She wasn't asking for him to change, to become someone else. She was asking him to stay, to face whatever the future held, side by side. The galaxy might have been on the verge of war, and their lives might have been shaped by forces beyond their control. But for the first time in a long time, Michael felt something like peace settle within him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from victory or from having all the answers. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing he wasn't alone in this. He looked down at her, his heart racing, and in that moment he understood. The life debt had bound them together, yes, but it was more than that. It was a promise to stand together, no matter what happened. It was the understanding that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. "I don't know what the future holds," Michael said, his voice steady now, "but I know I won't face it alone, not anymore." Aeslia's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, a smile touched her lips. "Neither will I," she whispered. As they stood there beneath the stars, the weight of their shared bond seemed to fade, if only for a moment. The galaxy might be on the edge of war, and the challenges they faced would not be easy. But in that quiet moment, Michael and Aelia both knew that together, they could face whatever came next. And for the first time, Michael felt the weight of the life debt not as a burden, but as a promise he was ready to honor, not because he had to, but because, in a strange way, it had become his choice too.